All right, morning and welcome back from the tea break. I think we're really privileged to have the Deputy Prime Minister join us. I was just commenting to him, he's been tremendously energetic and engaged with a lot of stuff, especially in this week. So I'm sure trying to squeeze this in might not have been easy. Just speaks to how much you think about the subject and agenda that you've been able to find the time. So the way we do this, DPM, is I'm going to ask you to maybe spend a few minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, just with an introductory statement of your thoughts. And then I have a couple of themes I want to explore with you. And after that, I've got the pigeonhole. So if there are any specific questions from there, or actually, frankly, anybody in the audience wants to raise a hand. DPM told me he prefers live questions. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, I'll try and accommodate that as well. Problem is we are tight for time. It's 25 minutes, so I'm just going to dive straight into it if I can. So DPM, all yours.
Sure. Thanks very much, Piyush. Good morning, everyone. Very good to be here. This is a conference on philanthropy in Asia, in Singapore. And I'm glad that philanthropy in this part of the world is growing, and we see many positive signs. But clearly, there is scope to do much more. If you look at other places with longer traditions of philanthropic giving, like the US, for example, I think we have still some way to go. Look at the great American capitalists of the 19th century, names like Carnegie and Rockefeller. They amassed great wealth, but they also gave back a significant portion of their wealth. And that was very much part of the implicit social contract, that there are opportunities for people to generate and accumulate wealth, but in return, you have to give that back to society. So I think it was Carnegie who said, a man who dies rich dies disgraced. And today's American billionaires have continued that tradition. Bill Gates and Buffett a few years ago started the Giving Pledge. They talked about encouraging fellow billionaires like themselves to give back a majority of their wealth to philanthropic causes. One of the billionaires who did that said, it's better for me to do this, give back big chunks of my wealth, because I do not want to deprive my children of the chance to make their own money. I think it's a very enlightened philosophy, because we all want to care, do our best for our children, but you know that if you give them so much of wealth to start with, you may not be exactly creating the best incentives for their perspectives and outlook in life. So many young American entrepreneurs are doing the same now, embracing similar ethos. That's in the US. In Asia and in Singapore, we see positive trends, but clearly we do not yet have that same long tradition or strong traditions of philanthropic giving. And that also means that there is potential to do much more. But the encouraging sign is that when we look at Singapore in particular, we are seeing a growing base of successful entrepreneurs, unicorns, as well as more and more family offices being set up here in Singapore. And when we talk to them and engage them, many of them tell us they would like to leave behind a legacy beyond wealth accumulation. They are looking for investment opportunities that have ESG characteristics, that align with their values, and will leave behind a positive impact on society. So these are very positive signs. And we would like to encourage them to do more, to set up philanthropic arms and foundations, and deploy a significant part of their wealth, or at least part of their wealth, toward causes that they feel strongly about, and endow charitable foundations that can continue to do good well beyond their lifetimes. And all that is also consistent with our own philosophy and how we want to see Singapore's next bound of development strategies. Because Singapore has succeeded as a hub serving the region and the world, and we have been, over the years and decades, steadily building ourselves up as a reliable and trusted hub, a hub for trade, investments, talent, and finance. But looking ahead, we also see an opportunity for Singapore to be a hub for philanthropy in Asia. where businesses, individuals, family offices can use Singapore as a base to contribute meaningful and impactful solutions toward the pressing issues around the region. So we welcome all of you as partners in this important endeavor, and we hope that here in Singapore we can continue to do well and do good for ourselves and also for Asia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those. You're probably aware, DPM, Ho Ching just announced this morning this Philanthropy Asia Alliance, right? So I think this idea of being a hub for philanthropy in Asia, I think we're well on our way. But I want to start off first with a philosophical question. It's kind of abstract, but I'll ask it nevertheless. And the question is, you know, the relative alternative ways of trying to do social development, right? So one approach is the American approach, where you let people make a lot of money and then give it back through philanthropy. Some people think there's an alternative approach, which is you tax the rich and you do it through a social welfare state. So you go through the arm of the government as opposed to individual contributions. And some of the criticisms around philanthropy is, you know, why should individuals get the right to set a social agenda? A government should set the agenda. Do you have a view on this, or is it possible to strike the right balance?
Our view is that you really need both. You need active governments as well as active and vibrant philanthropy. All of us know it's without dispute that in order for an economy to be strong, vibrant, to grow dynamically, you need a thriving market system. But if you take that market logic to its extreme, then it's every man or every woman for himself or herself. And that is certainly no way to organize society or to build a nation. So governments have to step in to resolve social issues. Governments will have to take care of income and wealth inequalities and continue to support the vulnerable and disadvantaged segments. But if governments were to do all of that, everything, then we will easily end up with a system of high taxes that could potentially dampen economic dynamism. But worst of all, I think it will be a system that's entirely run by state administration. And you will lose that sense of human touch and compassion. And it will not be the same. Even if we are able to uplift the lower end, there will not be that same sense of community and ownership and responsibility. So in our view, if we want to build a fairer and more inclusive society, it cannot be defined solely in redistribution terms. It must also engage the human spirit, and it has to strengthen that culture of responsibility for one another.
And the social compact you've talked about, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's where philanthropy comes in. Because if a person who has done well in society is prepared to give back voluntarily, I think that strengthens the spirit of community and fellowship. And importantly, it enables wealth in society to be recycled and invested back into society to expand opportunities for disadvantaged and vulnerable segments. That's very important, and that's how we can build stronger social compact, continue to uphold trust in society. So that's what we believe in Singapore, that we need a combination of both. Act lean. In Singapore, we want to keep government lean, but lean and effective, actively looking at ways to mitigate income and wealth gaps, to uplift the lower income, uplift the poorer segments of society. At the same time, a very vibrant ecosystem of community and philanthropic groups so that we can all move forward together.
Very clear and completely on point. DPM, I want to move on to the second theme. You know, when you announced the financial sector transformation roadmap a week or two ago, encouraging philanthropy as a means to attract family office investment was one of the pillars of that transformation roadmap. And I think by and large, we as a country do well. I came across this report from the Global Philanthropy Environmental Survey done by the University of Indiana earlier this year. It surveys 91 countries, and Singapore ranks number 12 across half a dozen parameters. The economic factors are ease of operation of philanthropic institutions, tax policies, et cetera, et cetera. What else do you think we could do, however, as a government to actually focus, a government or a financial sector, to actually encourage growth of the system. The two areas where we scored less than, we scored 4.52, which is fantastic. Liechtenstein was at 4.91. And when I tried to figure where is the gap, a couple of the areas where I noted the gap, one was cross-border flows, and the other was socio-cultural issues. Now, socio-cultural issue is about people and culture. Cross-border flows, I think, is more about policy. So what else could we do as a country to actually continue to make it a great climate for philanthropy?
There's a lot we can do, but I would reframe your question slightly. You say, what else can we do as a government? I know it's a very Singaporean instinct. Whenever there is an issue, we say, what can the government do?
But I am talking to the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore.
But, it's not as though the government is ineffective, but maybe we have been too effective, and therefore everyone, whenever an issue arises, say, what can the government do? But really, we should have a mindset that we are all in this together, and we need to solve problems together, government and people, as partners. And so if you ask me what else can Singapore do as a whole to strengthen philanthropic giving, to make us that base for philanthropy in Asia, I think there are several things we certainly can do. First, I mentioned that there are some positive signs. We already see many family offices, individuals, businesses wanting to give back. Let's link up and strengthen that, catalyze more partnerships with one another, like through events like this. So Temasek Trust is doing its part. The Wealth Management Institute, I attended an event from them yesterday. They are forming a global Asia family office circle and also starting to bring people together to catalyze stronger partnerships and to see how like-minded donors can combine their efforts for more impactful giving overseas. So I think that's certainly an area that we can continue to work on. Second, I think working together between government agencies and philanthropists based here in Singapore, we can continue to identify appropriate causes overseas. Because we speak to many people, they say, we would like to do more, but the region is highly complex and diverse, and we don't quite know what are the areas to contribute to and how to go about doing it. So again, working together between government agencies and donors here in Singapore, we could identify suitable causes, put in place appropriate mechanisms to monitor the impact of giving so that philanthropists here also are assured that when they give overseas, to address the point about cross-border flows, that the giving is impactful and meaningful and will truly contribute to making a difference in the region. And then third, which is finally the government aspect of it, well, we will do what we can and to see how we can support more of these flows. So I mentioned yesterday at the Wealth Management Institute that we are reviewing our tax incentive schemes to see how we can encourage family offices to not only give within Singapore, but to give overseas as well. So that's work in progress, and when we have completed our review, we will provide the details in due course. But really, it's a combined effort of all the different parties, and the bottom line message is this: to anyone who's interested in wanting to give in an impactful manner, to contribute to the region, we would like to say the best place to do this is right here in Singapore.
Thank you. I think that foreshadowing a review of the tax system and maybe tax credits is going to be welcome news to a lot of people over here. So
please don't wait for the incentives. You can already give back. You can already give on your own. I mean, what is the incentive, frankly, to many family offices?
I'm only reflecting what the University of Indiana says, DPM. All right, DPM, just moving on to thinking about finance. You think there is a role for more innovative finance, which is public-private, i.e. blended finance, multilateral government finance, co-coupled with philanthropic money in an impactful way?
There certainly is a lot of scope. It's something that we are focused on, particularly in the area of sustainable financing, green financing, because we know that Asia will be the battleground for climate change, and we need to accelerate that green transition in Asia. But we also recognize that there are tremendous needs in Asia. Asia is very diverse. Even Southeast Asia itself is highly diverse. Countries are at different levels of development, and in many parts of Southeast Asia, you have millions of people even without basic access to electricity and water. So how do we ensure a just and fair transition for many of these countries to achieve their net zero plans? And the one thing that's needed is much greater focus on transition activities and transition finance. But in many regional countries, they have tremendous potential for carbon mitigation and for renewable energy projects. Tremendous potential. The assets are all there. But financing is an issue because you can build a solar plant, you can build a wind farm or hydropower plant, but the offtake is too expensive because electricity is highly subsidized by coal or fossil fuels. So there is a gap. And if the gap exists, the project is not bankable and will not be financed. How do we bridge that gap? And the one way is through blended finance, where we can bring concessionary capital into the picture, and that concessionary capital can come from multilateral development banks, or it can come from philanthropists like yourselves. And then we can crowd in and catalyze private capital, work out blended structures to get more of these projects going. We have some platforms. We have started some blended finance platforms in Singapore, but we do hope to scale this up and do more.
Well, climate is getting a lot of attention, and for good reason. It's the most compelling challenge. But as you think beyond climate, biodiversity, nature, education, health, I think this morning we heard about focus on this thing. Are there other areas, both for Singapore and the region, that you think we need to be focused on, which should be on the agenda?
Certainly. I mean, I've talked about climate and sustainability because it's such a big challenge. It probably will be the biggest challenge of our times, but there are clearly other areas. Public health is a huge area where we really need to strengthen our systems, strengthen our ability to collaborate with one another, strengthen our primary care network, because that's where typically you are able to identify the first signs of an infectious disease brewing in the community. So strengthening surveillance, strengthening public health networks, and thinking about how we can do that collaboratively all over the region, that's something that we should really focus on. And if we do not do anything there, we are really just sleepwalking into the next pandemic, because everyone thinks that COVID-19 is over now, right? So the sense of urgency to do something has come down. But if we really don't learn the lessons from this pandemic, we will never be ready for the next one. So public health is a key priority. Education too, because human capital is so essential to any country's development. And human capital means starting from young, preschool, formal education, but also continuing adult learning and lifelong training.
All right. Anybody in the audience wants to be the first to kick off a live question to the DPM? All right, at that table.
DPM, I'm very appreciative of your views about creating this.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I'm Lawrence Chong, and in the capacity of the Vatican Office for Interreligious Dialogue. DPM, you mentioned a lot about this, building a social compact. I wonder, in your view, as you share that it's very important to be contributing to the region, how does this trying to strive to bring Singaporeans having this higher purpose to be almost this more charitable Singapore towards one another, factor in with this need of caring also for the region as in a way of helping Singapore to, rise up and not to be so conflicted at times about this self versus others?
Okay, DPM, can I supplement that question?
Sure,
It's a tricky question. One of our challenges as a country is people in the region are suspicious of our intent. Everybody says the little red dot always tries to look after itself.
Yeah.
So how do we change the narrative? And how do we get people to trust us, i.e. that we genuinely have a more generous and better side to ourselves? We're not just commercially minded all the time.
Well, there are two aspects to this. One is, how do we encourage that spirit of giving in our society at large? And I would say, if you look at all the indicators, I wouldn't be too hard on ourselves and our fellow Singaporeans. We are a generous people. We do give very generously in times of crisis or even in good times. Just look at the last 2.5 years and what we've been through. And we've truly seen the best of Singaporeans coming forth, people doing their part, going out of their way, looking after the elderly person stuck at home, socially isolated, providing help and relief measures for the needy and the disadvantaged groups. Many different groups are doing that voluntarily, and you see that groundswell of goodwill and generosity. So we are in many ways doing well. And in fact, this does not extend to our board. It's not limited to within our borders, because when you see crisis breaking out in any parts of the region, the tsunami, Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia, other major crises that can take place anywhere in Southeast Asia or even further afield, Singaporeans do donate very generously. So, let's not be too hard on ourselves. Let's continue to foster that spirit of giving. We will continue to do everything we can in the government side, whether it's through fiscal incentives, but hopefully through other means, social norms, through mutual encouragement. And through all of these different ways, we start to shape society's culture and strengthen that spirit of giving. So we will do all that. Now, how to address perceptions is a different matter altogether. I think it's partly related, that the more we give, you can address some of these perceptions, but it really goes beyond that as well. It's really about how we can deepen our engagement with countries around us, with regional governments, even on economic matters, to assure them that Singapore's prosperity and the region's prosperity are intertwined and interlinked. We cannot have a successful Singapore and a poor region. It's not possible. So whenever Singapore strives to do something, we are always looking for win-win solutions. We want our neighbors to prosper and be successful, because when our neighbors are successful, Singapore will be successful. So in all of our business dealings, our commercial dealings, our government dealings, let's look for win-win solutions.
So I've often speculated, DPM, money is one thing, people to people engaging with purpose is actually another thing. I've often wondered whether having some kind of a Peace Corps program where we get young Singaporeans, maybe it's part of NS or after NS, to go and do 3 months or 6 months in neighboring countries and actually volunteer and contribute might be a way to change that perception and narrative. Do you think it's a stupid idea? Or?
No, it's not going to be part of national service, which is...
Okay, maybe international service after following national service.
Which is purely for defense. But we can do more than national service. I think we already have a youth corps speaking exactly to that idea that we want to encourage young people to go out to the region, to do projects in the region, to contribute in the region. And so we will continue to try to encourage more young people to do that. In fact, we already have a 70 by 70 program in our schools where we are encouraging, I think, some 70% of our students, every cohort, to be able to spend time overseas, and 70% of that ought to be in the region, ASEAN or China and India. Because when you speak to many young people in school, unfortunately, they would all love to go overseas.
To Europe.
But it's US and Europe. But we should not neglect this part of the world. That's why we are focusing on getting them to spend more time in the region, in schools, and through the youth corps. But we will continue to do more of that. I think another aspect which you talked about in terms of the people-to-people relations also comes down to that basic attitude and mindset, which is yet another important part of our social compact. In Singapore, we always want to maintain an informal an egalitarian tone of working with one another, of relating to one another. That we should be free to interact and treat one another as equals and accord respect to each other, regardless of our jobs, professions, or income and wealth. That's the tone we want to set in Singapore society, and we should continue to keep it that way. It should always be a tone of understatedness, restraint, and we do not want to encourage conspicuous displays of wealth or status. In fact, we want to frown on such ostentatious displays because that's not the Singaporean way. Now, if we do that, that same attitude should extend to how we relate to our neighbors and our citizens from other countries at the people-to-people level. Never treat them differently. Treat them as equals, treat them with respect, and I think if we can do that at the people-to-people level, it will go a long way to building trust.
Well said, sir. So I'm probably going to be able to squeeze in one more question, so anybody wants to ready themselves. Meantime, the maximum voted question on my pigeonhole DPM you've already addressed about tax benefits for overseas giving. And as you said, it's under review. So that's good news.
Why is that the most voted question?
I'm just telling you, it is the most voted question. The second question actually is a tongue-in-cheek question. Is that philanthropy is huge in the US because the government is not as efficient. So maybe you should be less efficient in government to encourage philanthropy.
Well,
I'm going to pass on that one. I don't think we want a less efficient government.
well, we should try. It's a relevant point, right? Because in most other places, ground-up community and philanthropic efforts emerge because they find that state solutions are not effective. So we should recognize that. It's sometimes inadvertently, the government may crowd out these genuine ground-up efforts. So we should be conscious of this, and we should constantly try to look at ways in which we can work at solutions together in partnership. Which is why when you ask the question about what more the government can do, I would like to reframe that to what more Singaporeans can do together.
And the third question I'm going to also mention and gloss over, say, would setting up a development bank backed by Singapore be something to be considered? And given my development bank
Maybe
roots at DBS,
you should answer that question.
I think I'll skip that one as well. Any question from the audience? Anybody want to raise your hand? Yes.
DPM Hemant Amin, Asian Capital, Family Office. Thanks for your comments. My just suggestion would be we have a lovely Singapore pledge. Could we have a version of the Singapore Giving Pledge, which the government can take a leadership in its organizing? Instead of billionaires pledging, even ordinary millionaires can pledge at least $1 million.
Ordinary millionaires, I love that one.
It's not for the government to introduce something like that. I mean, I can tax the millionaire. I can tax the billionaire too. But I don't think you want us to introduce a giving pledge. I think that should be owned by the community, and we would certainly encourage family officers, high net worth individuals here, people who have succeeded here in Singapore. By all means, initiate something. Get your fellow successful businesses and individuals to come together and initiate a giving pledge in the same way. And you can still look after your family and children. I'm sure you have enough to look after your family and children and make sure that they continue to be well provided for. And there's still a lot that you can deploy to philanthropic causes, good causes both within Singapore and the region. And that's certainly something we would like to encourage.
DPM, we're running out of time. I'm going to wind up with one question which is more topical. Somebody had a question there which says, what do you think happens to philanthropy in a recession? And I'm just going to broaden that question. I mean, obviously, the global economic environment is looking choppy. And it's not just philanthropy. There are concerns about a slide back on climate, on carbon, on people using more coal because of the energy security challenge, etc. Do you think we're in for a period where there will be some slide back before people get back on track? And what else could we do to handle the situation in the next year or two?
We are certainly in for turbulence. That's no doubt. I think all the growth engines are slowing down. EU already, US very likely next year, China depends on what happens with zero COVID, but this year very weak, and next year a lot of uncertainty. So all the growth engines are impacted. I think the energy and food situations continue to be very uncertain. Europe, from what I hear, will have sufficient gas reserves to get through this winter, but what about next year's winter? Where will they get the gas from? So it's going to be uncertain all around. I think where energy is concerned, inevitably, in order for countries to keep the lights on and to maintain energy security, there may be some temporary sliding back, or at least, hopefully it's temporary, and we must recognize the imperatives of energy security, of keeping the lights on, but we should also, at the same time, redouble our efforts to make sure that after we have settled the security concerns, we are able to push forward on that green transition, which is so essential. Where giving is concerned, I don't think there will be a slide back in Singapore, because we have shown time and again, when there's a recession, when there's a crisis in Singapore, in fact, the opposite happens. Singaporeans come together, we rally together, and we do more, and we give back more to help the needy and the vulnerable. And that's precisely the part that's so encouraging. And so I think to end the session, I would just like to thank all of you here who are philanthropists, who are donors, who are passionate about the cause of leaving behind a positive impact on society. Thank you for your generous contributions in so many different aspects of society here in Singapore and in the region. And as I said at the beginning of my remarks, we want to make Singapore a center for philanthropy in the region, and we look forward to working with all of you to advance this important cause.
Yeah, that's a fantastic note to end on. Please join me in giving DPM a round of applause.
Thank you.